According to the American Federation of Teachers, it is estimated it'll cost each American school $2.3 million to purchase the necessary safety equipment and to sanitize our classrooms to keep children safe. Furthermore, according to a recent poll conducted by USA Today, 1 in 5 American teachers are unlikely to return to the classroom once the school bells ring this fall due to safety concerns from the virus, leaving the American education system in peril and parents scrambling to figure out what to do. John Stricklen is a professor of business administration at Johnson University in Tennessee. He joined me this week to discuss how business, education, and politics intersect. I'm Kevin McShane. Let's have this conversation. Jonathan, if you're ready, we'll welcome you to the show, and we're excited to be with you this morning to tackle some education issues along with some lifestyle issues as well. So great to see you this morning, and thanks so much for being here.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
So, Jonathan, when we look at whether or not to send kids back to school, I'm wondering, as a professor, your view of the argument when you hear people say kids have to go back to school for their mental and emotional development along with their educational development, as opposed to protecting their health. What would you say to that argument?
I think there is some validity to it. The Washington Post and several other periodicals have pointed out that child protective agencies all over the country have seen a huge decrease in the number of reported child abuse and neglect cases. Some, up to 90% less calls this time versus last year. And ERs are seeing, when they're seeing child abuse cases come in, they're more severe. And so I think there's some validity to that argument. And it sort of stands to reason that as the rest of us have experienced the stressors of unemployment and reduced income, those who may already be prone to abuse are not going to abuse less. These stressors are going to aggravate that. And so I think that there's some validity there. As a college professor, I am concerned very much with my students' mental health. And as we all have experienced anxiety and uncertainty around the COVID-19 pandemic, I think it's natural that our students are also going to feel some of those anxieties. And the last time that we dealt with this was a century ago. And so there's nobody around that we can really turn to and say, hey, how did you deal with this pandemic? How did you, suffer through it? And so it's important that those who are able to, have the opportunity. But ultimately, I think what it comes down to is I think that not every area of the country is facing the same challenges in regards to the amount of cases that they're seeing. And so I think that each school, each district, local leaders need to have the empowerment to make those decisions that are best for their communities and their constituents, rather than everyone go back to school or no one go back to school nationwide.
Now, what do you think about the discussion of when we look at school administrators who are concerned about the amount of money they'll have to sort of retrofit schools and keep everyone safe, and the teacher's argument of not wanting to go back because they're in sort of a high-risk area? What would be your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, that's ultimately, I think that the teachers and the administrators in each school know better what their students, what their buildings, and what their communities need, better than I think anybody outside of those areas. My inclination is always to sort of trust teachers first. And so if there are teachers who are saying, you know, there is not a way for us to protect our kids' health, you know, we're seeing some areas still that are having, you know, explosive infection rates still. Students, you know, teachers in those areas are saying there's no way that we can do this. This is too high risk. There's no way for me to adequately do my job and teach these kids. My inclination is to trust them rather than try to dictate to them from outside what's best for their school and for their students and for their classroom.
Now, when we look at what the president has said, he obviously has a vested interest in the economics of people going back to school because that's his big re-election platform argument as to why he should be re-elected. But I'm wondering also your thoughts on the debate between in-person versus e-learning as well.
Right. So that's really a tough question. There are a lot of challenges involved in adapting to a hybrid model. And a lot of those challenges are different depending on which level of education that you find yourself in, both as a teacher and as a student. So the challenges that I'm facing in a post-secondary environment and, you know, at the college level are different than the challenges of an educator in grade school. But if I had to identify like one big obstacle, one big concern, I would say that would be, how do you keep students engaged right now? And not just how to engage students virtually. I mean, we've been looking at that for years, and we've got lots of best practices. But how do we keep students engaged right now with all the chaos and uncertainty that students and educators and administrators and parents are all facing together? It is a difficult proposition to put students in a virtual or a hybrid or a mixed learning environment and expect education to take place, or to expect education to look like it looked before all of this happened. From kindergartners all the way to graduate students, students are people first. And they can't just turn off their humanity or check their emotions and their fears and their anxieties at the door just because it's time for class to start. And so I think the biggest challenge that educators are going to face is providing a space where our students can process through some of those emotions, because fear and anxiety are not ideal for learning. When you're distracted, you don't focus. When you don't focus, you don't pay attention. You don't retain information as well. And so as I look down the road of how am I going to present my information to my students, how am I going to assess their learning, how am I going to ensure that they have learned and retained the things that they need to learn and retain in order to be successful, the biggest obstacle I see is not necessarily are they going to be in the classroom or are they going to be online. It's how are they going to focus? And being online presents some challenges there. When I'm in the classroom with my students, I can sort of sense, and I can read nonverbal cues. I can see their faces. You can sort of get a feel for the room, and realize, you know, people aren't engaged. People aren't paying attention. I need to do something to sort of bring everybody along on this journey together. when you're online, when you're separated through a screen, that gets so much harder to do. And it requires a lot of intentional pre-planning by the educator. It requires a lot of focus. And it's just generally, it's a much harder proposition.
Now, I know that you teach business administration, so I'll also ask you this in relation to sports and college, particularly college football. As you know, it's a big driver of economics in America, especially
Right.
in the athletic realm. So, what do you think about the return of college sports? And do you think they can be viable without people in the stand or students back on campus?
Oh, that is a good question. The university that I teach at does not have a football program. We have several other collegiate sports, but generally speaking, I think college sports are probably the trickiest element of all of this. It is easier to design a classroom and an academic approach to reduce the risk of infection. Spacing out chairs in a classroom, everybody wears a mask, reduce the amount of time that you're in class together, which are all things that my university and several others have done. But that gets much harder to do when you're out there sweating, breathing heavy, knocking into each other in close quarters for extended periods of time. That risk of infection skyrockets. And so I think it's going to be really interesting as we start having these student athletes go back to playing their sport. We're going to sort of see are we able to even put into place parameters that can reduce the infection? Is the lack of live audiences going to impact student play? There's energy in a stadium when it's packed with 70, 80, 90,000 fans watching a college football game on a Saturday afternoon. When it's a few hundred people, most of them, the athletes and the staff, is that going to change the way that games flow? It's a giant toss-up right now, I think, and it'll be really interesting to see what happens as we move forward.
Now, economics and politics are certainly interconnected, and certainly, as I mentioned earlier, the president is largely focused on getting the economy back to where it was pre-COVID. So I'm just wondering your thoughts on how business, politics, and health interconnect. And I see you laughing when I finish that question.
I was going to say, in a word, poorly. I sort of see business and politics on a very simple level. They're very similar. Now, when you factor in all these different things, they're not identical, and I would never make that claim. But if you get really, really simplistic, they're actually very, very similar. You want to remain in business, or in the case of politics, you want to remain in office. You want to remain in power. And to do this, you have to provide people what they want. So if you're a business, you provide goods and services. If you're a politician, you provide for their civic needs, demands of the voters and constituents, things like that. You provide good legislation. And if you don't do what people want you to do, then people will put you out of business. If you run an organization, they will buy from your competitor. If you're a politician, they will vote for your competitor. Ideally, people are motivated to meet the needs of the people who keep them waking up every day and doing the same thing over and over and over again. But practically, there's a lot of temptation to do unethical things because they work. And so you see businesses will cut corners and they will endanger people or exact tolls on the environment, and you see politicians will cut corners. I say all that to say I think one of the issues that our president has, and I'll preface all of this by saying that I am not Donald Trump's biggest fan by any stretch. But I think one of the problems that our president has is that he has hung so much of his reputation on economic performance that now that we are in this pandemic together, unsurprisingly, our economy is not doing very well. The global economy is not doing very well. A lot of our common indicators are down. GDP is down. Consumer confidence is down. Unemployment claims are up. And again, none of this is surprising because the factors of production, farms, factories, all over the world have had to shut down or reduce their output because people have gotten sick. If you study economics at all, this is not surprising. But the corner that our president has found himself in an election year is that his reputation is of trying to boost economic factors, trying to, as you said, sort of sell a brighter outlook of the economy than what is really accurate. And we've seen even this week, a couple days ago, or it might have been yesterday, the president tweeted something about potentially delaying the election.
Yeah, it was yesterday. Yeah.
Yesterday, about delaying the election. Now, I don't know why he said that. He has a history of saying irresponsible things on Twitter, and I can't assign motive. But there have been several who have said that potentially he was saying that to try to distract from economic reports that are coming out that showing that our GDP is down. I don't know that that's why, but it wouldn't surprise me, given that that really hurts his reelection chances.
Now, one thing that I believe also is that if people would wear a mask, it would help to spur economic recovery and sort of help the president's argument. But as you know, wearing the subject of wearing masks has become inherently political. So I'm wondering, why do you think wearing a mask has become so political when it's the only proven way that we have with social distancing to fight the virus?
Right. I've struggled with this one a lot for a few weeks because it seems like such a silly thing for people to get so upset about. But there have been reports from all over the country. One lady pepper sprayed a group of people in public who didn't have their masks on. A security guard at the front door of a business asked a guy to put his mask on when he walked into the business, and the guy who didn't want to put a mask on shot and killed the security guard. So people are literally being assaulted and killed over this, which is mind-boggling. And I don't know that I have kind of the answer, but my perspective on that is that I think that the masks aren't really about the masks. I think the masks are symptomatic of a deeper pathology, and I use that word intentionally, given our current situation. I think that one of the things that we're dealing with as a country is that we are so deeply divided, and not just on policy prescriptions. I mean, politics has always been a dirty game. And people have always, fought over different ways to accomplish goals through different policies and legislation. But one of the things that I think tended to exist was this idea that we both want the same thing. We both want to see our communities and our country succeed. We both want to see people live good lives, the pursuit of happiness and all of that. We just disagreed on how to do it. Now, what I think we're seeing is a widespread acceptance of the idea that if you disagree with me, you're not just wrong, you're evil. And so if you choose not to wear a mask, that's the same thing as you being willing to murder every single person that you encounter in public. And if you want to make me wear a mask, you're willing to strip me of every right that I have and throw me in an internment camp. And so there's very little middle ground. We've sort of erased all of the gray area and compromise, and we've labeled gray area as indecisiveness and compromise as treachery. And that just happens to be manifesting itself right now as a discussion over masks. Like you said, the simplest and most proven way to slow down the spread of this virus is to stand further apart and to wear masks. And if we were to do that, more businesses could open. We would be less concerned over a lot of the things that we're seeing. But people refuse to comply with this seemingly simple directive. And I think it's in no small part because the level of trust that we need to function as a society has been so eroded by the rhetoric of the last few years. And we've allowed politicians to use this rhetoric, and instead of calling them on it, we've sort of jumped in the trenches with them. I don't think left and right is a really good way to describe people. I don't think it's accurate, but it's easier it's more simple to say that than it is to really break down each individual group. But I think that as long as the left sees the right as everything that's wrong with this country, and as long as the right sees the left in the same light, I think we're going to continue to see, frankly, dumb things like masks continue to become political and divisive and really a much bigger deal than they are. Because when you assign everything the moral weight of good versus evil, then there are no dumb things. Everything matters. And I think that's where we are with masks.
So just a simple follow-on for you. What do you think is the key to unifying the nation, and how do you think it'll play in November?
Ooh, I wish.
Maybe not so simple.
I was going to say, I wish I had an answer to that. As a Christian, I have a unique perspective on that. I think I place a lot of emphasis on the church needing to act like the church. I think that people generally need to turn off their TVs and put down their phones and go talk to their neighbors. The other side doesn't hate you as much as you think they do. The other side does not wish suffering and death and despair for the world. There are people out there, for sure, who do that, but they are a tiny, tiny minority of the population. And I think that the more people take the time to get to know people who don't agree with them, I think the more we'll start to see that. The challenge is that getting to know people and really listening to people who disagree with you is scary, and it is hard, and it requires a lot of humility and courage. And I don't know how to get people to see that.
And I'm just curious too, in this pandemic world, what do you think? I know you have strong views, as you said, about building relationships. So my final question for you is, what do you think is the key to maintaining both a strong work-life balance relationship, and if you're married or in a relationship outside of work? What do you think is the key there?
That is a great question.
That's why I left it for the last one.
I love it. So one of the things that I think people, especially right now, need to hear, as there are a lot of people that are working from home, the more you blur the line between work and the rest of your life, the harder it gets to maintain a good balance there. And so I think a lot of people need to hear that just because you're working from home, just because you may be working from home, doesn't mean that work needs to become all consuming. And so you still need to keep, pretty rigorous disconnects between work and the rest of your life. So for instance, I'm down in the basement at my desk. This is where I work. I work 8-9 hours a day, but this is downstairs. My bedroom, my living room, the rest of my family, everybody is upstairs. So there's that physical separation. Even though I'm not going into the office, I'm still maintaining office hours. So I come down here every morning about 8 o'clock. I bring my coffee with me. I work. I go upstairs and eat lunch. I come back down. I work until 5 or 6 o'clock whenever I'm done. And then I'm done for the night. I don't come back down here unless something crazy has happened. And so I've sort of kept that time routine to try to maintain that work-life balance.
And sanity.
Yes, yeah, exactly. And my sanity. As far as relationships outside of work, that's really the tricky thing. It's tough to maintain relationships when you can't go see people, when you're supposed to maintain that distance. For my marriage, it's required a lot of creativity, and I'm not always a super creative person, but it's required me finding ways to show my wife that I love her, even though I can't, go out and buy her flowers or take her out to dinner, or go do some, big fancy date night. So it's been little things. We share, like we both have the Kroger app on our phones, and so we've been click listing our grocery shopping a lot just to reduce the amount of time we spend out in public. And so the other day she put together the shopping list, and she was like, okay, let me know what you want to add to the shopping list before 8 o'clock. Because when you've been married for 10 years, that's the kind of, crazy fun conversations you have. And my wife loves Three Musketeers candy bars. And so I went into the Kroger app and I added a couple of Three Musketeers to the list. And she didn't notice it until she picked it up. We were at home unpacking groceries, and she pulled them out and she was like, well, I didn't order these. And I said, well, I did. I thought you might like a little treat. It cost 99 cents and 20 seconds of my time. But you would have thought that I had just taken her out to a 4-course meal. It's little things like that you have to find creative ways to do it, just to show people that you're thinking of them, that they matter, and that you want to do things to show your love, to make them happy. Requires creativity, requires thought, but I think that if we focus on doing that for each other, and if there are others out there focused on doing it for you, I think that we're all going to get through this a lot better off.
Fantastic, Jonathan. I want to take a few seconds to thank you for your insights and perspective on a wide-ranging discussion we had this morning. Really enjoyed the perspective, and I want to thank you for being here this morning. Thanks so much.
Thank you for having me, Kevin. I really appreciate it.